Hello, everyone. I'm Gene Kim. I'm the co-author of several books, including The Phoenix Project, The Unicorn Project, Accelerate, and I have an upcoming book with Dr. Stephen Spear called Wiring the Winning Organization. I'm the founder of IT Revolution, and today I'm so excited to be interviewing Dr. André Martin about his new book, Wrong Fit, Right Fit: Why How We Work Matters More Than Ever. I am such a fan of Dr. Martin. He has over 20 years of experience as an organizational psychologist and a talent management executive. In his book, Andre digs into what makes us truly sensational at work and how to bring out that excellence in our teams by finding the right fit between talent and organizations. Andre, I'm so delighted to be talking to you again, and congratulations on finishing just a phenomenal book.
Hey, Gene, it's really good to be here. It's good to see you, and thanks for that. Yeah, it's an exciting moment. The book's finally out in the world.
Yeah. By the way, and then if before we jump into what your book is about, is there any? Can you maybe share your biggest surprise in terms of like learning as you went through the book writing journey?
Yeah, there were quite a few, as you well know. But I think the biggest one was the early days of just the concept change. Right when I went into the book, I really thought I was going to write this book around culture in this new age of work. Right, that there are these best practices that every organization should follow. And I think in the end, as I started the interviewing process, it wasn't that simple. And so the big surprise was, wow, you have to be ready to change your framing questions quite often as you come through the writing process. I think the second surprise was just how much smarter I felt at the end of it. When you write a book, you dig into this concept at a level of depth that I just don't think we spend our days going that far. And so by the end, I was just like, I feel so much smarter about the world than I did before I started writing. And that was a huge gift.
Oh, I love it. I love this one quote. In order to think clearly, you need to be able to write clearly, right? And then I suspect that has something to do with that feeling. That's amazing. Yeah. So one of the things that I know you've been talking passionately over the years that hasn't changed was, you were almost fixated on this number of the $7.8 trillion of lost productivity due to, disengaged employees. So can you help me understand, what is being engaged versus disengaged? So what is that and why is it important?
Yeah, so engagement at its core is just the level of emotional connection and commitment I feel to the place that I'm working or that I'm a part of. And so engagement is a really important predictor, right? Our level of commitment is a predictor to our own productivity, the productivity the teams we're on, the overall sort of satisfaction of our customers with our end product by the time all the work gets through the system. And so it's just a vital metric in measuring our ability to do more, be more, and be better as organizations today.
In fact, before we go into that amazing quadrant diagram, which was near the end of the book that I just found eye-popping, can you talk a little bit about, maybe some of the research literature about the link between employee engagement and customer satisfaction? I mean, just on a scale of 1 to 10, or maybe an R score, like just how strong is that link, and why do leaders care so much about it?
Yeah, Gene, depending on where you look, there's a very strong correlation. I mean, upwards of 0.43 if you're an R correlation person. And it's not just to customer satisfaction. You look at manufacturing plants, there's correlations to safety. You look at overall sort of productivity, there's correlations to engagement and productivity. So you start to look at this customer satisfaction idea and you say, you know what, often we're so focused as leaders on the product itself, on the thing that we're bringing in the world. And we sort of forget that the fuel that is human ingenuity, and the fuel for ingenuity is engagement, right? I will be more creative, more innovative, the more I'm engaged and committed to an idea reaching the world.
I gotta say, I sort of like feel like I intellectually understood it, but maybe some of that visceral understanding wasn't quite there until I saw this amazing quadrant that you put in the diagram. And so maybe do you want to explain that quadrant? What the X and Y axes are, and like the labels that you put to them.
Yeah, so the quadrant is really trying to answer the question of what allows an employee in the day-to-day to be fully engaged. And so on the X-axis, there's this idea of meaning. How meaningful is the work that I'm doing? Low meaning versus high meaning. And on the Y-axis, there's this idea of impact, right? How much impact is the work I'm doing having either on the team, on the system, on the customer? And so when you look at the top right of that quadrant, That's full engagement. When you have high meaning, that is the work you're doing really matters to you personally, and you have high impact, which the end result of that work changes something that's of value to the world, right? That's the sweet spot. And then if you look at the other two quadrants on the other side, high left, low right, you get commitment, right? When you have one of those, but not both, you get a committed person. And then at the bottom, when you don't have either meaning nor impact, all you're really getting is compliant. That person is walking in the day, doing as little as possible as they can just to get back out the door again.
And by the way, I thought that was just so descriptive and visceral. Is that where did that quadrant come from? Because I think it just really helps connect the dots in terms of like, to what degree are leaders setting the tone and creating the conditions for people to do their work easily, well, with joy, with engagement, with energy.
Well, I have to give credit to the interviewees that were part of the book. So I interviewed by the end over 100, 110 talent from around the world. And when they were talking about their work, you sort of heard people, and I don't think they use these words, but they were talking about these two vectors, these two factors, right? When they talked about work that really got them excited, it had this thing of it mattered to me. It helped. It was, in a craft that I'm trying to be great at. It was an area I was trying to be better at. It just personally made a difference to them. And then they said, and the work, I could see how it impacted the performance of the company. I could see how it was getting out in the world and making a difference. And so it really came from the interviewees saying, man, we need to break up this idea of engagement a little bit further. Because as you think about the individual experience of it, those two factors both have to be there to really be fully engaged. That's why when you see entrepreneurs, right? I mean, you were an entrepreneur not so long ago, Gene, and entrepreneurs wake up every day obsessed by this idea because it has both meaning and there's a space in the market that's not being filled where they can sort of meet an unmet need. And that's sort of that idea of sort of full engagement coming to life.
Well, that's so interesting. In fact, my personal reaction when I saw that is, I've seen some of the Gallup studies and how they labeled, the spectrum of, fully engaged or fully disengaged, right? And, I think I could recognize that, but I found like the real story was in that quadrant of like, can leaders sort of generate full engagement versus, tap people's commitment versus, enforce compliance. And for what it's worth, I just found that to be so much more expressive and have such explanatory power than like the typical treatments of engagement.
Well, I appreciate that. Maybe that's the next book. We'll see.
Yeah. Very good. And by the way, can you just, before we talk about like the conditions that create engagement, can you just take a minute to maybe describe, what leaders do, when they're only getting commitment or getting compliance, the shame of like only, reaching that level.
Well, I'll go back to a point I just made fleetingly at the top end of the interview, which is, I think being a leader is a very hard thing to do in this day and age for a lot of reasons, right? You've got a lot of pressure. We're in a, macroeconomic environment that's sort of hard to maneuver. You've got a lot of expectations for performance and you're burnt out. 52% of managers right now are burnout. And so when you look at that, I think part of what's happening on one side is our managers and leaders just aren't fully prepared. I don't know that our organizations have prepared us for this moment. We've had a decade of decadent growth, right? So this time when we could almost do anything in the world would be okay. Now you've got to be great at your job. You've got to be able to boost productivity. You've got to be able to boost engagement. And I don't know that they're fully prepared. So I have a lot of empathy for them. I think on the other side, when you're thinking about your talent, there's a couple things that sort of stand out. That the best managers in the world, they don't just see the task that needs to get done. They see the human behind the task that's getting it done for them. And so the best understand the motivational framework or formula of that individual person. They understand their skill set really well. And they understand how to take all the pieces of work they need done and put them with people that will find more often than not that thing to be both meaningful and high impact. I think the second thing the best do is they connect the dots. Every day they're re-recruiting their employees. Right? Why is the world better with us in it? How do we make money and have impact? How do we work? What's my promise to you? They are just unwavering in that sense of, I need to keep you committed because commitment is fleeting. Full engagement, really hard to even get there. And once you have it, you have to work every day to be able to keep people in that space.
Love it. And by the way, maybe just one other sort of meta observation that I actually found so lovely was we talk about people as talent as opposed to human resources or resources. And yeah, I'm familiar with that term, especially kind of in the sports industry in Hollywood. Can you talk about maybe the history of the term talent in your field and why you think it's important and why you chose that word?
Yeah. So, I mean, as we grew up with the Industrial Revolution, we were just resources, cogs in a wheel, right? And we were also doing very rote tasks, very specific, very well-defined tasks to get products created. And I think as we moved into this kind of knowledge era of work, where our jobs are much more cognitive than they are often physical, it is about artistry. It is about craft. It is about you being able to bring all these sort of disparate skills together in a really unique way. And so I really believe that's where, for me personally anyway, the term talent just resonates so much better. And in my own experience as a leader, like I'll walk into a new company, get a new team. The first question I ask is, tell me all the things you're great at. Tell me all of your superpowers. And I'd often find things like there'd be a learning designer on my team that's developing programs that used to be a journalist for a large major magazine. And you just see these talents, right? They're sitting here, they're unique, they're diverse, they have all these things. And often what we do to them is put them in a very narrow role, right? We just treat them like they're this role, this thing they're doing in the company, and they're much bigger and broader. I mean, we know that from DevOps. Every time I'm at your conference, right? You see these individuals and the stuff they do outside of being great in the technology space blows my mind. Yeah. And so that's the idea of talent for me, is just let's recognize the craft and the artistry of the people who we're surrounded by, and it just changes your orientation to them.
That's amazing. And so, one of the things I loved about the book was how leaders can what they can do to help their team fit, create fit, find fit. And, for just to set some context, right? I've been studying high performing technology organizations for 24 years. And one of the top factors is, leadership, right? And so what I found so delightful was the way you described, certain things that, people need. They need inspirational buffers and then relational buffers, right? You talk about an authentic connection to purpose or cause, meaningful work, growth opportunities, connection to consumer need, legitimate relationship with time. And just to finish out relationship buffer, you talk about a supportive manager, meaningful mentors, workplace BFFs and doppelgangers, and life outside of work is magic. So can you talk about things that leaders can do to create this, maybe not so much for them, but for themselves, but for their team?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the great thing about these buffers, which again came through the interviews, when I ask people questions about, hey, once you found a right fit place, a place you felt like you were riding with your dominant hand, what kept you in that flow? What allowed you to retain that sense of fit through all the chaos and transformation and things that changed? And then for other people, it was like, hey, when you were in a hard fit or wrong fit situation, was there anything that made it better? That made it okay or even great to come into work next Monday. And so this list of buffers were sort of those things. When I look at these are both meant to be things that talent can do for themselves, but also tools that managers can easily provide. So I'll grab a couple of them for you, right? I mean, as managers, one of the main jobs we have is to delegate work. And if we can delegate meaningful work to people, so meaningful work can be two vectors, right? On one, it can be super important, high value project or initiative that sort of links to our operating model in our business. Or it can be something that I just am really good at that I haven't got to do for a while. And so as managers, instead of just thinking about how fast and efficiently can I get this work out to people, think harder about who's going to find it meaningful, right? That's one. Another one that is really within the manager's sort of control is this legitimate relationship with time. What's really interesting is I think we've lost our relationship with time during COVID. We have packed our calendars, scheduled a ton of meetings, lost our boundary between work and home in many ways. And for me as a manager, one of the things you have to do is you have to realize that opportunity is infinite, right? Human energy, it's finite. And so your ability to make sure people have a relationship with time that allows them the space to be creative, allows them to have intention when they come into meetings, allows them to get out of work, live their life so they come in the next day more energized and not working off fumes. And so all of these buffers in the book are really great ways for both talent to help themselves, but managers to really create a better environment.
One of the things that you had talked about in your book was helping create a career plan. Right? In fact, I think you mentioned a 20-year career plan. Yeah, can you give me an example of somewhere where you've seen someone actually help create for someone else a career plan, right? That maybe it's not 20 years, but certainly more than 1 year out.
Yes, Gene. In the book, there's this series of excursions, right? All these exercises to help you know yourself, what you're solving for, what you need right now before you start searching for a job or thinking about leaving the one you're in. One of the exercises is this future retrospective. And so I'm a big believer that it's important to have a metric, a stake in the ground in the future that you're shooting for. If for no other reason, then it allows you to find the signal in the noise. Now, you may not get there, right? But your day-to-day focus and intention, if you have that sort of North Star, you just carve through the noise and the information in your day a little bit differently. I'll give you a good example. So I did that future retrospective many years ago for myself. And at the end, when I was whatever age I was working on, I thought I'd be a professor living in a small town, married with kids. I had all the things. And as I look at it now, I didn't get there, but the foundational elements of that plan, 100% I've made a part of my life, right? I am a professor. I just do it in organizations. I am living in a small town, not on the beach yet, although soon, but a smaller town in Portland. I have this, little piece of property in this little neighborhood that feels like I'm in a small town. And so the reason that you create them isn't to get them right, isn't to force yourself to get there. It's so you can pay attention to the opportunities that we don't see just because of all the noise in our frame of reference.
And one of the things I've seen and admired in kind of great leaders that I've encountered in my journey is they create other great leaders. They end up going into amazing places, leading incredible initiatives, right? Often within the same company. And so, can you talk a little bit about like what leaders can do to make sure people on their team can achieve the same sort of fulfillment and engagement that you've experienced in your own journey?
One of my colleagues back at the Center for Creative Leadership, and a great mind in this space, her name is Vidula Ball. And she kind of framed this term for me, a star maker. She's like, often with leaders, the leaders we recognize are the ones that get the big pieces of work done, and we move them quickly up and through our organization. But the unheralded stars within our company, they're the star makers. They're the people that when you look back at your career, everybody came through their leadership, right? They're the ones who are just in that position saying, I don't care if I go any further. My cause, my purpose, my reason for being is that I'm going to help everybody else accelerate. And so they do that so effectively, right? And the things that I think they do more than anything else is in their hierarchy of identity, they put themselves below the people that work for them.
Andre, before we leave this topic, another thing that really caught my attention was how important meaningful mentors are. And it occurred to me that one of the things that team leaders can do is they have this amazing network inside the company, and they can actually help do the matchmaking between people on their team and meaningful mentors. Can you talk a little bit about like why mentors are so important and the role that leaders have in helping create mentors for others?
Yeah, mentoring is a bit of a mystery in organizations. Often people that want to mentor don't know how to get one, and people that want to be mentors don't know the skills you need to really be good at it. And so I think first and foremost, a company or leader needs to figure out what kind of mentor am I looking for? Because there's many different types, right? There's mentors who are the soul of a company, right? You match them with somebody who's new to teach them the inner workings and the history and the stories of what made the company great so they can connect to the past and bring it into the future. There's also mentors that are masters or mistresses of craft. Like these are the people that are just so great at their thing that they're good at. They're a great programmer. They're a great DevOps person. And these individuals, you connect with people who are trying to learn more or grow in a very specific area. And then there's mentors that are just models for the kind of leadership that we want people to showcase. And so emerging managers need to have that as a mentor so they know, hey, this is what great leadership looks like here. And so I think that first thing that we can do is just really think about what kind of mentor am I looking for? What kind of mentor does this person need? And then the second thing that's important is just to set up the relationship correctly, right? mentor relationships should be driven by the mentee. They should take responsibility for them, and they should come prepared with the questions that they want to explore, right? And then a mentor shouldn't feel obliged to be a mentor the rest of your life. You have a team you have to take care of. You have a lot of people in your lives. Mentoring should be, in short bursts of energy and insight. And that should be agreed early on to say, hey, I'll mentor you. We'll do it for a short time. And then, we'll come back another year from now and do it again. But that we just don't weigh people down with these endless or infinite mentoring relationships, because then they start to resent a little bit, because then they're overworked. They don't have time. Their calendar's not clear enough for them to do their day job.
By the way, I think this is so important because over my career, I felt like I have moral certainty that I owe so much of it to mentors in my life, people who have had tremendous influence on what I'm working on, how I do it, what I've learned, their network. And so what does that email look like? That request look like, to initiate that relationship?
Yeah, there's three things that I would tell anyone looking for a mentor relationship is first, be choiceful. So in the email, tell that individual why you're interested in having them as a mentor. I think secondly is being able to tell them a little bit more about yourself and what you're looking to sort of learn and grow into and discover. And I think third is make it okay for them to say no, right? Because the thing about mentoring is everybody wants to do it. Every time I get a call, I want to help, right? You do. And you can't help everybody all at once. So I think as mentees, let's just realize that there's a time and a place. And we want to make sure that we're giving the person the opportunity to say, if not now, maybe 6 months from now. And so I think those are really important in that email. Why them? What do you need? And make sure you give them an out to make it okay that they can say no or say yes, but let's do it 6 months from now.
It's so interesting that you mentioned the sort of the sense of obligation and burden. When I take a look at some of the most collaborative exothermic relationships in my life, it's usually been the ones where we get to work on something together, that we both get something out of it. And I think the reason why it works so well for, say, grad students and professors is that these professors that have research grants, they have things that need to get done, and they are looking for talented people who are willing to donate their time, right, and expertise, and that leads to a very symbiotic relationship. And it seems like just having the person, I think the seed of the ones that have worked best for me are the ones who ask, what are you working on these days? What are you the most passionate about these days? And to be able to say, oh, I'd love to help, right, and there becomes a implicit, or better yet, explicit interaction exchange of what we both get out of it.
Hey, Gene, I like that. And to even now, let's reframe and revise the email. Let's say the last thing that should be in that email is, an offer, a very specific offer to help. I think that's, everything should be reciprocal. And the best relationships in the world always are. They're 50-50. And so making sure that there's a way to frame that email, to your point, which I love, that, as you help me, I want to return the favor. That just makes that relationship bind that much stronger. So I love that ad.
Super. And one of the startling claims that you talk about in the book is about sort of the 3 Ps, the principles, practice, and patterns of how we work. So I've come to believe that leaders are responsible for outcomes, certainly, but that certainly includes, creating the conditions so that people can do their work easily and well. And I love the way you talk about the principles, practices, and patterns. So what are the indications that leaders haven't done a good enough job defining those 3 things? And what would be the top advice that you would have to help remedy that?
Well, Gene, I think you're hitting on probably the number one contributor to that $7.9 trillion of lost productivity. As companies grow, we bring in people from the outside to fill leadership seats. And what we don't realize is that not only are they bringing their technical skill, their craft, they're bringing all their cultural baggage with them. They're bringing their favorite work principles, the norms of behavior that they've seen work. They're bringing the practices that work best for them. And they're bringing their favorite platform, their favorite technology, their favorite project management tool. And what happens over time is the more people come in, that company that once had a very distinct, very effective way of working now has just become this big, messy hairball of everybody's individual belief about how work should get done. And so what I would say to leaders is step back if you're running an organization and ask yourself, how does this company work at its best? And what I would encourage anyone to do is to go out and find the most effective teams, right? And then copy those ways of working. And again, ways of working are different in functions, right? IT works very different than HR. But the truth is 80% of the way that we work needs to be similar because the majority of that work happens on the horizontal. I'd be hard pressed to find a company outside of sort of holding companies where the work doesn't actually happen this way as opposed to this way. And so because we're no longer in the Industrial Revolution, we can't have different ways of working in every single one of our functions. That's where we have the coordination costs that I know you talk a lot about in your book. And so, my advice is rediscover how you work at your best. Get really specific about those ways of working. How do you collaborate? How do you solve problems, manage conflict, socialize, give feedback, develop people, all those things that make up work on a random Tuesday. And then communicate, teach that, and hold everyone to account for working that way. And I think we'll find our way to making work less work.
Yeah. And is there maybe let's go with the practices or across principles, all of the three P's. Is there one that you just is that one of your favorites in terms of things that just need to be explicit or things done a certain way?
Well, here's what I'd say, Gene, is out of those three categories, the one that's emerging to be more and more important is the platforms, right? So now that we're working in this hybrid world, which for all the stories about us all going back to work, we still are, and we always will, right? Is this idea of that technology is now your culture, right? So our ability to build a tech stack for the employee experience that matches the principles and practices that we stand for and the way that work gets done, I don't know that we think about it that way, right? Often we'll just say, oh my God, let's just put Teams in. And, Teams is different than Zoom, is different than Google, is different than the next one. And to be choiceful by saying, let's get really clear about our work practices and principles. And then let's find the work technology that allows us to most easily live those. That's going to make hybrid working a lot easier, a lot clearer, a lot more compelling for people.
That's super. And so among principles and practices, which one of those do you feel are your favorite? The ones that you feel like are impactful or surprising, things that maybe leaders don't think about enough or maybe are not as explicit about, whether it's decision making, whether it's information sharing. Which one is your favorite? Which ones are your favorite?
Oh, I don't know that I have favorites. I think the reason the question is so compelling to me is because when I listen to leaders talk about company culture, they sort of talk about values. Right? We're innovative. We believe in teams. We work together. We collaborate. And I'm like, I want you to talk specifically about what it feels like to walk in the door Tuesday morning. I want you to tell me, like, how do you want people to solve problems? Right? There's a very different affinity set if you solve a problem through design thinking, which is a very human-centered way to do that, versus solving it through a Scrum. And so thinking about how do we solve problems effectively? How do we manage conflict? How do we give feedback? What we're seeing, the reason this is so important to me, Gene, is that we're seeing 1 in 3 new joiners walk out of their companies within 90 days. We're seeing 53% of new joiners still looking for a job after 6 months of being a new company. Part of what they're all citing is that there's a mismatch of expectations. What you told me was true about how we work isn't actually true as I walk into the office every day. And that mismatch is just driving down commitment, driving down full engagement, putting us all in a place where we're sort of compliant until I can find something better.
One of the things that I just loved about that you sort of pointed out was that, there are many ways to do things. We can write short, pithy phrases, or we can write white papers or PowerPoint slides. And each one of them is I've seen it, right? There are people who work in very different ways, and one is not necessarily better than the other, but it helps to be explicit about which one we do.
Gene, I love that you brought this up because one of the interviews I had was one of the most enlightening of the bunch, and it was with a creative marketing person who's worked at many of the big firms, P&G, Apple, some of the smaller startups. And the thing that she talked to me about, she said, you know what I thought? I thought in order to practice my craft, I needed to have the freedom to work however I wanted to work. And she said, what I learned over time is that when the ways of working are explicit and everybody follows them, instead of having to figure out how to create a way to sell in an idea, create a perfect PowerPoint deck, do the right, she said, I just got the template and I could put my craft into there every day. And so I was focused more on what I'm great at versus the coordination of trying to learn how to do work. And so I just thought that that insight was so powerful to say ways of working that are consistent. It's not constraining.
Mm.
Every great interviewer will tell you that the best thing you can have to do really good innovation is constraints. And what happens is when the ways of working are clear, more of our creative energy goes to our craft and less of it to the coordination of work. And I just find that whole idea, which I know you talk a lot about, super compelling in a place where, again, I think we're bleeding engagement right now.
That's interesting. And yes, you want, yes, it helps to know what the interfaces are between components that need to talk to each other, right? And so, right, jamming a 3-page PowerPoint slide deck into what's something that's expecting a 16-page white paper is probably not going to be very efficient.
Or the worst way, right, is imagine that you and I are working together and you're on a leadership team with 8 other people, and I'm presenting a new idea on how to revolutionize the employee experience. Let's say Joe Smith wants me to do it on a PowerPoint deck. You want me to do it on a 60-page white paper. Anne wants me to do it on a 2-page summarized memo. And then all of a sudden, think about the time, energy, and effort I have to put to crafting that idea in the right way so you can all see it. Whereas if you just had a single way of presenting and socializing ideas, we're going to be much quicker, much more aligned, and I'm going to be less exhausted at the end of it.
Oh, I love it. Oh, by the way, Dr. Claude Shannon, who created Information Series, we optimize communications for the receiver, right?
Yes.
So it helps to know, talk about explicitly what the receiver expects. So one of the things that we have talked about at length, and I so much appreciate your contributions to the state of DevOps research. You educating me on the employee net promoter score. One of the journeys that has consumed most of my 24 years is seeing how leaders how technology leaders, how they live or die by the quality of their bosses. And so I was so startled by your claim that the team can make the manager, not the other way around. And so what advice would you have for technology leaders who are trying to courageously create better ways of working, often potentially in opposition to people who are quite happy to do things the way we've always done it, or at least the way we've done it for the last 30 years? How can those leaders who might be quite lonely train their bosses so that maybe they're not, so they're not only more supportive, but, so that leader is less vulnerable?
Yeah. Well, I'd start with this, that there's 2 realities that every leader faces as they move up and through an organization. One is we all feel a little bit more of the imposter syndrome, right? That we're getting in these roles that maybe we're not quite capable or ready to take on. And secondly, is that we're getting less and less feedback about how we're doing. And so all we have in that case is to lean on what? The things that we know how to do really well and that have always served us. And so part of the thing that I tell team members who are trying to make a better boss is you have all the control in the world, right? And the easiest thing to do is to give them feedback around the behaviors you want to see more of, right? So instead of just saying, hey, boss, you're doing a great job, say, hey, boss, I love the way you opened that meeting with inspiration doses because it gave us a chance within 5 minutes to learn something new. And the thing is, Gene, and this is true of every human in the world, when you give someone feedback about something they're doing really well, guess what happens? They do it more
of it. Yeah, exactly.
And so, we all feel like we're obliged to follow our manager. I'm like, team members have a lot of power in this world because managers aren't getting feedback, right? And so our ability to shape behavior is enormous. And so often we get in this really small place as a team member. We don't feel like we have a lot of control, but I'm like, through feedback alone, you can shape and move and help your manager pivot. And the more your team does it together, the more that leader becomes what you need.
And so let's put ourselves in the shoes of that team member, this technology leader, right? And so they are probably the more on the frontier than their peers, right? And that their support from their boss is maybe tenuous at best. What specific advice would you give that technology leader to, whether it's work across and create a coalition, or specifically, interact and reinforce certain behaviors from their boss?
First thing I would say is, hey, figure out what kind of boss you work best for, right? Another thing, back to the excursions, there's an exercise in there that often we don't stop to think about: who do I work best for and what did they do behaviorally every day? Not, oh, I liked them because they're really nice to me. It's like, no, how did they lead in a way that allowed you to be great? Once you have that recipe, then my next advice is watch the world you're in with your boss and look for places where they do even an inkling of those things. And then start giving them feedback around those places, and you're going to see that leader progress over time. Now, that's a long tail, right? It takes a long time for behavior to change. I think in the meantime, the other thing you can do is really sort of use some of the buffers we talk about in the book. Workplace best friends at work or doppelgangers are a great thing to give you sort of grounding as you're going through a hard time or working for maybe a tough boss, because workplace BFFs, they are the places we can go and just say everything that we feel to someone who understands it because they're in our organization with us, right? It's very different than talking to your wife or husband or partner or best friend. They'll be supportive, but they don't know your reality. So those workplace BFFs are just this great place to go to find sanity again. And then the doppelgangers, and I love this concept, is this idea of a doppelganger is someone in the organization that has the same skill sets as you, is doing a similar role to you, has the same background and experience as you. They're sort of your work twin, right? Except for one difference, is they're succeeding really, really well when you might be stuck. And the reason I tell people to look for these folks is they can tell you that success is possible for you, right? You're just maybe not in the exact right environment in the organization, but don't jump, because you could be a success here. There just might be some shifts and changes you need to make in your current context to make that happen.
When I read that section in your book, I thought that was just so fantastic, right? And you had made a claim that those people who find those workplace BFFs, the doppelgangers, they tend to have more fun, they tend to be more successful. And can you just describe? And I can see why that's true. So for for those technology leaders, for people who maybe are not as adept or maybe not as wired to find those people, like what concrete advice would you give to help find those fellow travelers, kindred spirits, if it's just not obvious where they are?
It's a great question. I wish I had a really good answer to that, Gene. I think the only couple of things I would say is, even if you're not overly extroverted and you're not sort of a networker by nature, there are a lot of avenues and companies that allow you to build connections pretty easily, right? So project teams, so one of the things I tell project team members is, don't just let yourself come to a project team to do a task. Use that time and that sort of shared place to build better relationships. Let people know you and get to know these folks a little bit better, because then you'll get just a level deeper. And so the next time you see them in the hallway or at the lunch table, you can sort of sit with them and have a good conversation. I think the second thing is, there's a lot of employee resource groups out there, right? And they range from people who share hobbies to people who share affinities. And I think it's really important to join those, right? Because those are inherently built to build community. You don't have to work hard. Once you go to one of those, you're just automatically in. And so you can sort of find folks that way. And third and last is just, and this sounds maybe counterintuitive, but share more of your hobbies, right? In the places where it makes sense, share more about what you do when you're not sitting at work, and then people will find you. So that's what I would say.
Super interesting. One last sort of thing that sort of blew my mind. A phrase that used over and over in the book was, you want to grow faster than your company. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean, and why is that important?
Well, it's really important, Gene, because if you think about our jobs in growth companies, right? And assume that from 1% growth to 20, whatever it is, your job is getting bigger and more complex every day. And with the amount of pressure we've been under the last couple of years, with the amount of work that's piled up on our plates and in our inboxes, we're not actually spending a whole lot of time reflecting, learning, building new skills. We're making a faulty assumption, which is just by doing work, I naturally get better at work. And that's just not proven, right? A Center for Creative Leadership, where I grew up, where I started my career, fundamentally built on this premise that there's a big difference between key events and lessons of experience. Key events happen to us all. We all work every day. The leaders that continue to grow over time, they take those key events and they turn them into lessons of experience that fundamentally change how they do work, how they do their craft, how they show up, how they work in teams. For everybody else, you're honestly just repeating the same recipe of success again and again and again until it no longer works for you. And so why I say that's so important is that because companies are growing fast, if you're not spending as much time in percent learning and growing, you're falling behind your company. So if your company's growing 20%, you better find 20% of your time so you can get 20% better at what you do, because you're going to get outpaced. And we see this every day in startups. I just saw this interesting stat by Carta that said, like some small paltry percent of startup employees actually hit their 4-year vest cliff because they get outpaced. They're great when it's little, it gets bigger, 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 more complex. And then all of a sudden, they're not as capable as they once were. And so I think that's just our responsibility to ourselves, is keep growing faster than your company.
Love it. This has been so fun. Is there any last parting words of advice you would have that we didn't cover?
No, just come to DOS, come to the event in Vegas, come see Gene speak, pick up the books that are publishing by IT Rev. They're fantastic. And I'd say more than anything, just, the last piece of advice is don't mistake the excitement of something new for the comfort that comes with being in a place that makes sense to you, right? We are often looking for greener grass, and it's rarely out there. So before you jump, make sure the place you're at can't work for you, because transitions cost us. They cost us a lot.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. André Martin. And I just absolutely loved your book. Congratulations on getting it out there. And I'm so excited about where this is going to take you and this whole community you've built around it. Thank you.
Hey, appreciate it, Gina. It's great to see you once again. Thanks for having me.